First question I wanted to ask, because I think it's high on the list, is official bird of the city of Regina. Do you have a bird that you would want to see as the official bird?
I was for the Canada goose.
You were for the Canada goose?
But walking across the street. Like, it would have to be very specific. Or what did someone say, that they're called cobra chickens? I just think that's fantastic. And we have them. I mean, they're everywhere here.
Yeah.
But I also know that we actually have, we're a bird city, so we have a lot of kind of elegant creatures here. So I'm happy with whatever committee chooses. I think it's sweet.
It's a nice way for people to get involved.
Yes.
I think I've noticed that a little bit more, is this kind of push to get people's voices heard, involved in this kind of, not just the fun things like this bird decision, but also in other things as well. Is that a kind of a conscious choice from you as the mayor to get more people involved in how this city is operating and run?
Yeah, I would say that I love the fact that people are passionate about the city, and there's nothing worse than apathy. I think when you see a voter turnout of 22%, you can kind of go, "Gosh, guys, this is important stuff. Like, this is kind of where you live, and the devil's in the details of the frustrations or the joys of your regular life." And so to get folks interested in not just how things are run, but where we do and don't make investments, what kind of initiatives we put forward. E-scooters is a perfect example of, we had folks going, why can't we have that? Like, why can't we have that? Especially younger folks. And so to be able to produce that kind of program based upon, an ask from, we're going to every other city and it's everywhere. Why can't we have those things? So it's a level of rewarding and based upon feedback and input. Always, I think, has a little bit more. It's something a little bit more special.
When I think for you, this is your last full year as mayor in this term. You obviously have some more months to go before the next election. When you look back at what you've accomplished in these past 3 years, what do you think are your accomplishments that you've kind of been able to fulfill in these past 3 years?
I think a big one is economic opportunity. Whether that's the Viterra deal, land deal that we were able to facilitate, or the AGT Federated Co-op deal that we were able to facilitate, or even the level of cooperation that existed between the RM, the province, and industry in terms of everything from roads to rails to water to wastewater. There was something really fulfilling about playing a role there and not having things happen to us, but actually to help facilitate it. I think that's pretty significant. I mean, at the end of the day, residents, housing, everything follow jobs, follow education, follow things like healthcare. And so when you can be part of that, it's significant. I think the Indigenous procurement and Indigenous framework is significant. If we understand our history and we understand that the economic fairness and economic opportunity, we are all going to benefit. Everyone benefits if we can lift up and repair some of those systemic barriers that have existed. I think that's pretty important. I think the focus and attention on, we got to an application with our ISEP funding for an aquatic center. We know that investment in terms of attracting people to work here at the jobs or the industry that already exists here, recruitment is difficult. And so when we can invest in trails and recreational space and aquatic centers and all of that type of stuff that makes us feel like a little big city, I think that's enormously important in kind of advancing. I think the community safety and well-being plan and that entity that we created is a big deal, because we've committed to focus on those 6 areas that are within the plan, but to actually produce data and evidence. And both the province and the federal government have been really responsive to that, because it's by community with community. But to be able to collect the information and that evidence to go back to say, here's where you should create a program, or here's where you have a barrier within your existing systems that is preventing people from accessing, and whether it's shelter or services or mental health or whatever it is. I think that is a significant accomplishment. And then we've closed off some projects that had started before I was here, whether that's the Wascana Pool. When you see you get 100,000 visitors. So that was shuttered and opened during my term. That's a great investment to see the family and the accessibility and the beauty of what was created is a big deal. But it's everything from accessible playgrounds, things that create accessibility. That's that inclusive piece that everybody feels they can participate. And then I think from a growth perspective, we know that we know that new Canadians are a significant part of our growth. And so really being able to connect and engage with the organizations that work with immigrants and refugees here in the city and connecting them to networks of whether that's the Chamber or Economic Development Regina or having them volunteer, which may not be natural in their cultures, but here it's actually a way to get involved with community, to make friends and feel like you're a part of something. So just one last thing, I think I knew coming in that relationships with the provincial and federal governments were either not the greatest or didn't exist. And so, as evidenced by some of the funding we've been able to garner, but also the investment that we've been able to get out of both the province and the feds is federal governments is indicative of the way they're willing to work with us. I joke around that I got asked during my campaign about I needed to build a parkade at the General Hospital, and that's not my job. But so that when it happened, I'm like, oh, I can check that off. But whether it's new schools, Harbour Landing or Northeast, and working on something for more land out east, that kind of collaboration actually gets infrastructure dollars into our city and advances us in a way, allows us to leapfrog in a way that we could not do on our own.
I wanted to ask about the infrastructure, because you and I have spoken a lot about the infrastructure funding gap, the nature of this kind of problem and looming issue in Regina. My question for you is, I guess, how do we get rid of that gap, and how do we address some of the longer term issues I think that we all admit have kind of fallen by the wayside and now need to be dealt with? How do you as a mayor plan to address that, and is it as simple as or can the Regina address it on its own?
No. And I think that's important, and I would say that with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and I'm on the Big City Mayor's Caucus, it is now a plan where we're advocating for a change in the funding structure for infrastructure. Cities simply don't have enough money. You've heard me say it. It's 8 to 9 cents of every tax dollar collected in this country goes to municipalities, but we have 60% of the infrastructure that exists within municipalities. And so you can't actually ever catch up. And so that's where we depend upon ISIP funding, those agreements, those trilateral agreements. We depend upon initiatives that allow us to invest in a much bigger way. When we're at 21% of a $100 million project, well, the 100 million might be out of reach, but 21% is well within reach. So that's the advocacy piece, and that's the policy changes that are needed, and the going to the federal government, going, we need water and wastewater again, we need stormwater retention, we need all those basic things about building and revitalizing our city. So building and also replacing what was put in upwards of 100 years ago in some cases. But as important from a local perspective, from an ownership perspective, is getting real about an asset facility management system. And so when we're underfunding it on a continual basis, when we don't like to, as a matter of habit, speak about really expensive things, we have to break through that. Because you have to be realistic about there's a sequencing sometimes, and from a housing perspective, if before we did the Eastern Pressure Solution, which has been a problem that was identified like a decade ago, and had we not approved that and made that commitment, we wouldn't have been able to build anything else anywhere in the city had that solution not been put in place. And so why is it coming down to crunch time that it has to be done versus a bit more of a methodical planning process? But you need that in order to get more housing. You need wastewater expansion in order to get more housing, more industry, all of those things. And so there's a kind of process that I believe needs to be gone through about what's the proper order of that investment, knowing at the same time you still need to repair your roads, you still need, you still have park space that needs to be taken care of or developed, you still have pipes that break of existing, and how you deal with the maintenance part of it. But then that overall, when does maintenance not make any more sense? Like, when do you go in, and does it always have to be at crisis point? You know that the Brant Center is 50 years old in 2024. I think that's its birthday. And the library is 60, and the Aquatic Center is also 50 years old. And so when we know from an amortization perspective, when we go to do funding, we put things on 35-year amortizations, 25 to 35 years. So at 25 to 35 years, why wasn't this planned for 15 to 25 years ago? Like, it's something I am very frustrated by on the regular. And so really it's about how are you advancing for growth at the same time you're figuring out where the governments are looking to invest, because we can't do it on our own, we are at the whim of their initiatives at the same time. But it's about, if we have proper planning, if we have some sort of sequencing, we can advocate, but then at least we're ready when funding does become available to go, we need to trigger this now because the money is there.
When it's, because it's not just you, obviously, it's you, you're a single vote on council, there's 10 other votes. I guess when you've repeatedly stressed, and you've said you've been frustrated about this, I guess how do you convince your fellow councillors, the members on council, that actually planning long-term is important? Because I think a lot of people and a lot of councillors, all they hear or focus on is the mill rate is going to increase this much this year for next year's budget if we do that. So how do you win over council members or even people in the city when that's a realistic thing that we have to start talking about?
I think it's doing the right thing. I think if every politician is only concerned with 1 to 4 years terms and what they can accomplish, that clearly will still be a legacy, but isn't necessarily thinking of the whole city. Like I often remind my councillors, because they'll say, oh, I represent Ward 2, and I'll say, and the city of Regina. And I represent Ward 8 and the city of Regina. And so that understanding that it's, yes, I understand where you get elected, but we all swore an oath to this entire city. It's about the notion, it depends on who I'm talking to, because so there's some folks that will understand, like when you plant a tree, you're planting it for 30 years from now. Like you're not reaping the benefits of a 4-foot tree or a 5-foot tree. You want that to be a 30-foot tree, or that's going to take 30 years. And so, depending on who you talk to, and when it's some folks will understand more the economic argument, which is in order to attract businesses, and we know this because we've looked at competitive analysis from North America. When south of the border, they're investing great gangbusters in infrastructure like water, wastewater, roads, rail, things to move and transport goods where industry can locate. If you already have it as an existing thing and you don't need 5 years of planning to do a wastewater expansion, and they're looking for somewhere to locate, you can put your hand up and say, we're ready to go. And so really so some folks might understand that. And then I think everybody understands, if you've got kids or grandkids, you understand that in our city, in our weather environment, there needs to be things to do in the wintertime. There needs to be recreation. The participation of youth in sports is so important, and I don't care what the sport or culture or art is, it is so important for community connection, for that pro-social behavior. It becomes a prevention strategy for a whole bunch of problems that could exist 15 to 20 years down the road. And so it really kind of depends upon which counselor has sort of which motivation is how you position it. And oftentimes, because there's so much innovation and so much technology out there, you can kind of get, oh, that's shiny, let's go do that because that seems neat. It's like, well, if that costs $25,000, maybe that makes sense. But when you're trying to commit to $20, $50, $100 million, investments, it takes a bit more work.
I wanted to ask about this because I think there is that kind of brand new shiny toy feeling for, I think, some of the projects that the council has discussed. But there is that funding gap, which is, I think, for most people, relatively boring things like roads, vehicle maintenance, wastewater maintenance. How do you decide which one to, like, how do you have those conversations around, it's not just about the shiny new toy, it's about also improving the basic services that the city offers?
Yeah, I think that from a deferred maintenance standpoint, and I actually think that you've highlighted something really good. There's those core things that we do that make every person's life livable, from providing water to taking away your sewer water, to picking up your garbage, to mowing the grass in your parks, and hopefully pothole filling and road replacement and sidewalk repair. Those things that when they're good, you may not notice them, but when they're broke, you certainly notice them. I'm going to come back to proper planning and that's that local piece around proper planning and proper prioritization of projects. And I can't tell you that we do that very well right now. I can say with a certain degree of certainty, council feels disconnected from that. At the same time, I will tell you that if we get the same 5 people complaining 100 times, that can't be the response either. That can't be the prioritization either. And so we were just talking about this about sidewalk repair, for example. Well, let's prioritize everything over 5 years around schools and around seniors complexes. Let's just say that should be the policy to give some direction to it. That's not where council has played to this point. I will credit former council. They're the ones that even actually set aside money for sidewalk repair because it was a bit haphazard. We were told by someone who used to work at the city that you could live in the same house for 100 years and never had your sidewalk replaced. I'm like, holy smokes. Now, funding it, I think there are avenues that we haven't gone down before, and whether that's specific levies, whether that's sort of reserve set-asides that we're just going to take and set this aside, and we're going to fund this to make sure that if we have a backlog worth 20 years of sidewalks, that there's actually funding to go into it. Treat it no different than you would treat the utility. We've got a pretty reasonable financial model on our water utility. I'm not sure that shouldn't be the way for facility asset management as well.
Regina, I think, it's growing. You want it to continue growing. You've said you want not just to be ready for growth, like putting things in the ground ready for the money when it appears. I guess, how do you attract people to a city where we do have very cold winters? We are fairly small. We're in Saskatchewan. How do you attract people here?
Well, number one, it is about affordability. We know, we saw Halifax growth during COVID, where all of a sudden, if you could work remotely, why would you live in Toronto? Why not go to Halifax? And we saw what happened to their housing supply and their housing costs. And good for Halifax. That's not a knock against that. But there's an example of growth because people could work remotely. They have an ocean. I understand that. But from an affordability perspective, I think on a composite comparison for houses, I always think this is what Saskatchewan should do, but a composite comparison, meaning you're taking the exact same kind of house plan, not the average. And so the exact same house here as in Calgary, for example, is $200,000 less expensive. And so, can you attract folks from affordability perspective? And then you pile on, and we have all of these things going with us, and we're really active in terms of hosting, even if it's minor sports, whether it's provincial or national events. We host a lot of things. We're really fun. And then you celebrate winter as well. We have beautiful summers. You have half an hour in either direction, and you can be lakefront. You can go to the beach, and you can go to a free beach, frankly. And so it's really about, we have so much to offer here, in that you hear all the time, yes, it's very cold. And I said, well, if you're strong enough, you can survive a Saskatchewan winter. But I'm not sure that's any different than extreme heat for those places that never have winter. You go from air conditioning to cool space to cool space. Here we go warm space to warm space. But I really think that you can have a quality of life here in this city, in terms of commute times, in terms of opportunities for jobs, opportunities, great education, healthcare. You can put your kids in activities and actually participate with them because you don't have those hour-long commutes. And so we have so much to offer, being that little big city, and we have a ways to go in terms of growth before that is shed. Like, it's 15 to 20 minutes, you can get pretty much anywhere in this city.
Looking forward, I guess, what are some of the issues that you see either needing to be addressed in the future or that you're looking forward to getting resolved?
Oh gosh, you asked this just before budget. Honestly, I think I have figured out that in order to get some focus, there needs to be some more direction from council. And I don't mean about in the weeds, but we can be pretty haphazard in terms of understanding what our priorities are. Although I would argue that there's not a council member that wouldn't look at what we stated our priorities are who would disagree with any of them. It's just, again, how do you prioritize? I think that those foundational elements of water and wastewater are extreme, and so I think we have a water solution. And so it's really, in terms of those basic things, so wastewater has to be next. We have to have capacity for growth so that we can service some of our land. And from an infill intensification perspective, we need to deal with some of the underground aged infrastructure. And then it's about the replacement of some of our aged assets. And so, we have a brand new bus barn for the City of Regina. We have a brand new waste facility for the City of Regina. We have a new outdoor pool, but there's investment in the city buildings, which needs to happen, but there also needs to be more investment in terms of the community assets. And I think it's a pretty big deal. And then there's something that is kind of picking away at me in terms of kind of the transparency and accountability. If you've read our budget, it's kind of tough to follow, and I refer sometimes to this as being kind of a black hole of money. We're legislated that we can come and take your property taxes and we can charge fees for things, and we tell you on a line item where we're spending money. But you can say it's transparent because we told you what it is, but if it's not understandable, or it's not put into perspective or context, I'm not sure that's true transparency. And so continue to work with. We should have a dashboard up on the City of Regina so that you can see on a regular basis. I don't even care if it's how many kilometers of roads we're working on, the sidewalks we're working on. We have a lot of data, and some of it is about contextualizing it and actually sharing it out to the public so you can see on an ongoing basis that we are doing the work, and that we're not just telling you about it once a year when it comes to budget and we give you the highlights of 512 kilometers of roads got paved. Okay, great, and how much more do we have to do? I just think it's once you can share the story about the work that you have done, the work left to do, because it's never ending. I think that transparency piece, which then leads into the accountability for where you are investing.
One of the things I've noticed about you at council is you've always asked pointed questions, I think, of administration. I would probably say questions that you already know the answer to. Is that a tactic that you're using to inform your fellow councillors when you're asking those very questions? I think because you very clearly know the material, and you ask those questions. Is it for the purpose of informing your councillors, fellow councillors, about what is on your mind on that subject?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's in an effort when administration actually hasn't shared information, which I think is actually pretty valuable information for the public to know as well. Again, when work is being done, we should share that work is being done. I think that's important. And I don't always know the answer. Sometimes there's a certain percentage of the time I just think I know the answer. And so I am testing to pull it out. And sometimes it's about, I think we lack some policy here, some policy guidance, which isn't fair, frankly, to administration. It's not fair to the public. But until you're in it, you don't know that the policy doesn't exist, if that makes sense. And so sometimes I'm pulling at threads to see if you can identify a root cause, because you don't want to be. Again, it's a massive operation. It's dozens of lines of business and dozens of services that we provide, and so really, what you're always trying to get to is where that weak link is for policy that is missing, or direction that council needs to perhaps make, or that administration needs in order to know, okay, where on the ranking of prioritization is this that we're talking about. So yeah, and sometimes it is just from a transparency issue. I want the answers in the public record.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Real now. You've have a background in Real, obviously. You've now the mayor of this city. Mm-hmm. What do you think? I guess. How has your view changed, I think, on Real, or has it changed at all now that you're inside the city government, the head of the city government, instead of a board member at Real?
No, what I suspected was happening is, in fact, what is happening. I suspected when I was there, and it's really around that topic again of facility asset management. It felt very much like if we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. And so, we invested in that Stantec report. I was the board chair when that was invested in. And because we were saying, we knew the roofs of the cooperators were leaking, and in ownership, never occurred to us to ask publicly for that during a budget. We should have, because it wasn't in our budget. Like, you can look at the budget and say, well, there is no way you could afford millions of dollars of capital repair with how revenue is generated on site. And so around facility asset management, it is very much part of sometimes if we don't talk about it, or we're busy doing other things, and it comes back to that core principle of you should really get smart about managing these assets. What do I think about that facility? I think that nothing like it exists in this country. I think it allows us to punch above our weight when it comes to hosting events, as evidenced by, even the volleyball tournament that we did this year, like a Grey Cup being on one site, where all of the teams actually made money in those pavilions, as opposed to, depending upon people getting in cars and traveling to them. Something like QCX or Agribition or Canada's Farm Show, all of these events that you're able to host there, it is very unique. And so, I'm familiar with the economic impact that it has. It's in the hundreds of millions for the province and for the city, and that deserves to have its assets managed appropriately from an investment perspective and from a deferred maintenance perspective.
Because during the last meeting you mentioned you want and to be fair, you've mentioned this repeatedly, I think, you want those assets on the City of Regina's books because you want them addressed properly.
Yes.
Do you think it was a mistake to essentially house those repairs on Real's books rather than the city's?
Oh, 100%. Again, you can monetize, whether it's 90%, whether it's 100% or 110%, you can monetize those facilities, and they have been monetized. But it cannot, that organization, and I would like someone to point out another organization in the country that would have those assets on their books, where you can monetize it to the perspective that you can have a small surplus to invest back, but you're never going to make enough money between recreation and being competitive in that entertainment and sport and rec industry to pay for what I think on site, if you include the stadium, it's $1 billion worth of infrastructure. And so to have put them on the books in 2014 as contributed surplus in some respects has allowed them to not be thought about. Oh, well, we'll just let Real do that, or that's Real's intention is to make a whole bunch of money and invest back in. There's no organization that makes that type of money in this type of industry, especially if you consider that 50% of that entire site is recreational. And I'm going to tell you that for sure there's not a recreational facility that exists in the city that the City of Regina owns that has that kind of return to actually pay. It is something that we use tax dollars to invest for recreation, quality of life, programming, and sports, youth, senior programming that adds to quality of life.
When, I guess, Real's fate, whatever it is, it's up to budgeting that is coming up this week. I guess, what are your thoughts on how this process has played out? Because I think there was, at one point in November, Real had Tourism Regina, it had its board members, it had a kind of a clear goal of what was going ahead. I think about 3 weeks later, it didn't have Tourism Regina, and its board members are gone now. That's kind of a significant change for an organization, like you said, that has such a massive presence and effect in Regina. So what do you make of how that has played out?
Oh, I think it's been pretty brutal, to be honest. And it's bananas. I think from a tourism perspective, and this was probably a mistake on our part to ask them to do it at the same time they were doing the Catalyst project. It made sense. It was sitting with EDR, had been underperforming with EDR. We heard about it a lot from attractions and from the tourism industry. You have another municipal corporation that has more people working there, does touristy things that seem to make some sense. Overtaxed. The Experience Regina thing happened. It was a mistake. And so I think the only way to come back from that mistake was to actually, you got to refocus on the brand. So the brand of the City of Regina is enormously important. So let's put it in the City of Regina, even on a temporary basis. Even if it's 3 years, we rebuild that up and then figure out where tourism is best housed and what that looks like. I think that's rational. I think in terms of what happened to the board of directors, I think it's incredibly disrespectful. Those volunteers, and some of them I had worked with on the board of directors, those volunteers give hundreds of hours of their time. They're smart people, they're respected business people, and I think there is a level of disrespect shown there which saddens and frankly embarrasses me. So there's that. And then on top of it, there's about the stability of the organization. It is a complicated business, and it may only generate $55 or $60 million worth of revenue, but there's several lines of businesses within that, and it's an industry unto its own. It's not the City of Regina's industry, it is an industry unto its own, and it's massively important to the City of Regina. I think there was another piece in it which was missed, is that from a funding perspective, the most significant funder outside of the generated income there is the province of Saskatchewan, who had a board member. The province of Saskatchewan has, since its inception, appointed an ex officio member, and they give us $2.6 million, and the City of Regina gives a whole $400,000. And so to disrespect that particular board member without a heads up, without a conversation, it, again, is disrespectful. And And then I would say that to destabilize that organization is silly. I think coming out of COVID, it's had operating deficits that the City of Regina has been completely aware of. I think that the City of Regina has been completely aware that there is not a year that exists that those financial statements could afford the debt with which it was given. I think we have a stadium model that exists on the stadium, which no one has actually rerun the assumptions on, which I'm going to tell you it's not working, that some of the debt that Real incurred during COVID was repaying debt on the kitchen equipment that is in Mosaic Stadium, as well as the vendor equipment that they were asked by the City of Regina to take on. And so they were paying debt in a deficit. Nobody raised the flags. And this is not hidden information. This was provided to council. Administration knew fully about all of this. And so I think it's a travesty to point a finger at a board of directors who has been managing both the reputation of that site and the reputation of the City of Regina in delivering a world-class facility, definitely the best in my opinion in the province. And yeah, I think it's a game and a distraction, and I will just add to finish that yes, we have $1 billion worth of infrastructure sitting on that site, and yes, they ran a deficit during COVID, as did every other event organization, including the Rough Riders, in this entire country. And to not actually address that while it was happening when we had COVID money on the bank, that's a miss on my part. Fair enough. In terms of highlighting and perhaps pushing that forward, and all of our part. But to come out of COVID and to try and recover from COVID, as every event organization across the country is trying to do, and then to be concerned with somewhere between $20 million and $1 billion worth of asset in terms of debt out of COVID, and $2 to $3 million somewhere in there in terms of an operating deficit, I think is a massive distraction from $1 billion budget existing in this building right now.
Former board chair Wayne Morsky released that letter defending, I think, and echoing many of the things you have just said. There were also some serious allegations, I think, at the end of that letter. What do you make of them, or do you have any thoughts on those allegations?
I think right now I'm just going to say no comment.
Okay. I guess the only other, I have two other questions. One, Dubai. How was that trip, and what do you feel happened, and was it worth it for you?
I will tell you that it was a bit of a whirlwind for me because we had some flight delays due to Frankfurt being under snow. But I was able to get there, and we did one panel from an economic development perspective, talking a little bit about the investment and advancement the City of Regina is looking towards to get to 2050. So we've been investing in this, and again, it predates me in some respects, whether that's methane capture, whether that's a composting program, and our wastewater utility recapturing methane as well as powering. We're looking at geothermal to heat our aquatic center. We've got solar on 15 of our buildings so far. We funded energy retrofits to build upon, the federal government, electrification of buses, and then there's, frankly, I look at our trees. Our tree canopy captures 6%, and frankly, we could plant more trees, in my opinion. So it was good to get the message out that we are a place of innovation, and we are a place to invest. We know from an agricultural perspective, in terms of some of the economic factors that exist here, that we are a place, we are an agribusiness hub, we are an agri-tech hub. We know that, we should own that. And so I was able to also participate in a panel with Minister Guilbeault and FCM President Carol Saab and some others on the national adaptation strategy and what the City of Regina is doing. So we were looking from a local, provincial, and a federal level, and we all know a ton of these actions. There may be policies and funding, but the actions happen on a local basis. And so to really highlight some of those things that we're doing to combat extreme weather events, and some of basically the ask for financing for some of those. And what was interesting to me is the folks in the audience would want to come up and speak, and there was people there that had innovations on landfill management, had innovations on wastewater management, or that were looking at things like, hey, you're looking at geothermal, we think that's fascinating. It is about, I can promise you that there's a ton of people that existed there that had no idea where Saskatchewan was, and definitely no idea where Regina was. And so between the educational institutions and some of the really heavy hitters from industry, and from the agricultural community, I think it ended up making connections and advertising for us in a way that we are a place that solves problems, that we understand food in a way, and agriculture in a way that perhaps the rest of the world, just from experience, we know a lot about it, and I think we really highlighted that as either a place to study, a place to invest, or a place that maybe we can borrow innovation from somewhere else.
Okay, and the final question, I think you can probably guess what this one is.
Oh, it's going to be, are you going to run again?
Yes, yes. Well, I think it is, we are approaching this final year of your term. Well, are you planning to run again? I think, you've talked about planning for the future. I think a lot of those things that you were talking about still need to be planned for and laid out. Are you planning?
You're making my campaign pitch for me? Okay, so my answer is this, is I have a 4-year mandate, so it seems I don't want to be distracted by looking too far out. But I will also tell you that one of the things I've learned is everything takes so long. It's sometimes hard to see the progress because you're literally inch by inching it with multiple stakeholders, and you're moving things in a way which is, whew, I thought this could be faster. It's not. And so things take a long time, and I still have things left to do. And how about I just leave it there?
That is perfect for me. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thanks, Alex.